afternoon, India, and good morning, Spain. So here, this is Muskan Malvani, your educator, trainer, speaker, blogger, and founder of Educreate, where talent meets excellence. So today, Educreate present 11th talk show. With whom? With Yvonne Dolorto, ma'am. So who is she? So I'm going to tell you about her. Yvonne Dolorto is a British-trained teacher and former head teacher living in Spain for the last 17 years. She started using Phonics in 1998 and continues to use the Phonics program and train teachers globally. She enjoyed her interaction with teachers, students, and parents and continues to work online. She is currently working with schools and teachers regarding the NEP, that is New Educational Policy, and the effects of synthetic phonics and reading. She has worked in a variety of roles in the UK, such as special educational needs, early year development, primary education, and the coordinator of play facility for children. In 2004, Yvonne moved to the south of Spain, teaching in the bilingual teaching environment with an emphasis on English as a second language, literacy, and finally a head teacher at a British Council accredited school. She has traveled extensively internationally, providing training events, curriculum guidance, and resource development to schools and individuals, covering all area of ESL. She is a content writer, curriculum developer, and the author of the Macmillan Early Years Path, that is MELP. Runner-up for the British Council Eltans Award, she continues to work actively with school, teaching groups, teachers, and training online during the pandemic. Really feeling grateful that you are in front of me and on the Educreate's platform. Thank you so much, ma'am. And I would like to request you to please tell us about the Phonics and LSRW skills. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, well, thank you for that huge build-up. But fundamentally, my favorite role is working with children and more interacting with teachers. That in itself means that I am continually learning. And there are some absolutely wonderful, dynamic teachers out there who really should get a lot of credit for what they've been doing during the pandemic. So I'm very humbled to know people like yourself and also others who are still out there for parents and also teachers, giving them ideas and supporting them through this time. Now with Jolly Phonics, yes. I mean, I started with Jolly Phonics many years ago, and we started with very limited resources, and the resources have developed over the years. But that also brings me back to how today we have so many things we can offer teachers with the Jolly Phonics resources, but also how you can start with the most basic. So that's an important thing to remember, that with a handbook and a freeze, you can get a lot done. With lots of other things, of course, they're there to support you, but the main thing is the method, how to use the synthetic phonics approach. And with Jolly Phonics, it provides everything to put you on the path, so you know exactly what to do, when to do, and the sequence to do it in. And for teachers who are very busy today, as you mentioned with the NEP, that's a big thing coming into India. And also it changes the way that we are going to work with children, a more holistic and multisensory way, which can only be a good way, and one that is really needed now as children have spent so much time online. They are missing this approach, and we need to get it back into their learning path, really.
So, ma'am, here are some questions raised by our audience.
Okay.
It's totally from India. So your first question is, please tell us the specialties of Spain.
Okay, well, I'm not Spanish, clearly, I'm English, but the specialities of Spain is that, like many countries, it does have its core language, and it also has dialects that are spoken in different provinces. So this can be a challenge for teachers. The speciality of Spain also is the food. It changes dramatically, and having been to India, I know this is the case in India as well, that you have a huge range of cuisine, which is equally as beautiful in the north and the south and the east and the west. So we appreciate that. We are blessed with really good weather the majority of the time, but people tend to think that Spain is a very hot country all year round. It doesn't. We get very cold weather as well. So it's not unusual, even in the very south where I am, to have snow, for example. It's a complete country in that you can do every kind of sport, from skiing and winter sports down to water sports and summer sports. And the people are generally a very happy culture. They interact very well. They're very friendly. And I'd have to say that they're hardworking in what they do. So I really do enjoy working in Spain. But yeah, the characteristics are very similar to what you see in other countries as well. But the one thing is everybody notices is the beautiful flamenco dresses. These wonderful dresses that the ladies wear, which is, again, changes from province to province to do with their local fairs. And they are spectacular. So that's one thing that Spain is known for.
Okay. So, ma'am, did you ever visited India?
Yes, I've been to India. I've been to Mumbai, New Delhi, and Bangalore. And I actually have family in Mumbai. My uncle is from Mumbai. Yeah. So yeah. So I have quite a few links to India and also extended family there. Yeah.
So when you are going to visit Indore?
Well, I'm hoping that with the restrictions now being lifted, maybe next year is the possibility. But if we had not had the pandemic, I would have been there last year. But I'm definitely going to make an attempt to try and get there for next year. Definitely, spring next year.
Okay, so yes, we'll plan to meet.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, ma'am. So your second question. That how many languages you can speak? This is the first question. How many languages you can speak, as English is not first language of Indian, as our mother tongue is Hindi, so many people find it difficult to speak English in India. In similar way, what difficulty does Britishers face while learning or speaking any other language?
Okay. Well, I had the interesting concept that when I was at school, we were taught French, and I was never particularly good at French. So when I moved to Spain, I had to learn a language, and I had to learn it on the go, so to speak. So I was teaching and learning, picking it up environmentally. Now, this is very similar to perhaps what a child would do, listening and trying to organize it. The one benefit I had as being an adult was being able to make connections to what I knew and giving it a new name. So we think in images. So if I learned that, this is a pen in English, I could associate that this is a boli in Spanish. So just like you're saying, you have the structure in place and we're learning as an adult. As a child, this is completely different. So one of the things that I noticed is that learning a second language is a lot harder as an adult. And as you mentioned about in India, how they learn Hindi and children are learning English, the younger they can start is the better, as we know. And assimilating that into the curriculum and everyday life is the most important thing. But the problem that they have here in Spain learning English, and you have, is that they go home to a non-English environment. They go home to their mother tongue. So when I was learning Spanish, everybody wanted to speak to me in English. So it felt like I was never able to practice. And so I would say I used my experience as learning a second language and understanding dynamics for a child learning a second language. You need, as I know you do with your classes, you need to have that reading, writing, listening, multisensory approach to learning a language. Now, the second part of your question was, I didn't. That's answered
Was
first.
like we are using Hindi as it's our mother tongue. So the question is, in similar way, what difficulty does Britishers face while learning or speaking other language?
Okay, so there is a little bit of a joke here that the English are not very good at languages. They go to a country and they'd rather convert people to speak English rather than learn the language. And that's a very typical thing of people here. People who come to work here or expats who retire, they have a very limited amount of Spanish language because it's very unusual, really, for an English person to immerse themselves in a second language, unless you're in the situation that I am, where you have to work. And to be able to communicate effectively, you have to understand what people are saying to you in their mother tongue. So I think there's a new generation of linguistic abilities coming. And I think of my own children who are trilingual. The ease in which they've learned Spanish and French as well as English shows not only that having online platforms, being able to listen to things in other languages is going to change the dynamics, but also that the British have got to remember when they go to a country, not everybody wants to convert to speaking English. So I don't think the English are a great model for picking up languages, to be honest.
Ma'am, have you ever speak Hindi? Any single sentence have you ever spoke?
But no, but this is one of the things is that when I go again, I'd like to immerse myself more into understanding, because one of the things about working with language is understanding how the sounds come through in different languages and how they're represented. So my personal hobby at the moment is understanding the dynamics of linguistics and also the Indo-European origins of language. So yeah, watch this space for when I come to visit.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for the answer. Now, third question, as we all know about you that you are a curriculum developer and you have written a book also. So can you please tell us how to become a curriculum developer and any tips for writing a book as you are an author?
Okay, so I have written curriculums, and I also go to schools and advise on restructuring the curriculum they have. Now, one of the benefits of traveled and visited so many schools is having, like I'd say, an umbrella view of how curriculums work. Now, basically, a lot of curriculums have very much the same core elements, but they're restructured to fit what the culture and also what the country requires from the education system. However, there's one thing that is more or less set in stone, and that is the cognitive development of a child, understanding what they are able to do at particular stages in their life. So we have these milestones, which we realize what a child can do at 4 and at 8, and maybe at 12 and at 16. And we try to align the curriculum with what we see as acceptable and also borderline understanding of the curriculum. Now, designing a curriculum means that, one, you have to understand what is required. For example, if I was going to say here in Spain, what is required by each of these stages marked by infants or primary, and then you have to more or less work backwards that if you're in infants and the requirement is they need to know so many words in English, basic grammar structures, be able to read X amount of words, you have to take what is desired by the educational authority and construct what is needed around that. And if you're looking at a particular element like English, well, again, how many hours of English are the schools allowing? Here it's 3 hours a week in the public school, whereas in private school they may have 5 hours a week, but more English in other subjects. So designing a curriculum in the most succinct way I can say it is, 1, understanding cognitive development. 2, understanding what the educational our requirements are for the country you're working in. 3, how can that be broken down into elements that can spread into an academic year and also the academic trajectory of that child, be it infants or primary? And then also, how are you going to advise or construct the way the teacher is going to do this in class? So it's not just a case of understanding that you write something for September and something for October, and then hopefully it will all come together. Everything you're doing has to revise and consolidate and introduce. So you're constantly building this spiral of knowledge where the children are moving forward, but they're also moving back. So you need to have a considerable overview of, one, what you consider an average mean of a child to have at a certain age. And also, there are many places that don't even start reading and writing until 6 years old. And there's many countries that start writing, forcing writing at 3 years old. So it's about getting an average and understanding the dynamics. But certainly, I would say to anyone who wants to start writing a curriculum, really invest in looking at what other countries are doing, really look at publications and understand the dynamics of what you're asking a child to do. Because I feel we're packing so much into the curriculums these days. And childhood is the shortest period of time of their lives. Yet we want them to do so.
In this, we should have to do main focus on the Bloom's taxonomy, because as when we were in the B8 program, so they taught us only the Bloom's taxonomy, and that part we have learned about the understanding, how the student knows about, like student able to know, student able to understand, and all these things we have learned in our lesson plans also, because our teachers taught us to just think according to the student. So in that case, if we are designing any curriculum, so according to that, as we are seeking the need of the students, that how they need, how they are requiring for the yes.
But that's an excellent way to look at it. But then when you're in a classroom and you may have 30 students, you have no idea of their individual needs. So the idea is that you teach one concept, but maybe teach it in 5 different ways. And that is to address the emerging learning styles. We don't know with young children if they're more auditory, visual, if they are kinesthetic. So the idea is that when we are, or say, for example, if I'm designing a lesson plan, I have to imagine that I have the whole range of learning styles in that classroom, but I am trying to get over one point. We have to stop anchoring children to a desk and expect them to be receptive after hours of no movement. What we do know is that children learn quickly and retain if we involve a huge amount of activities and resources. However, if you think about it, in a classroom, a teacher can't constantly be providing activities for a child to do. It's unrealistic. But what we do, I mean multisensory activities, but what we do is build in these during the day so that children are, 1, building up the syntax in their brain with all these connections. 2, socialization, where they're learning from each other. That's another thing, where we have children who excel in one subject and may not in another. And that's where a teacher will know how to use a plan and navigate it to the best way. Your teaching plan that you have is like a recipe. And you add what you think will enhance it and take away what doesn't. Because as a teacher, I know that one class I have one year is not going to be the same as the one I had the previous year or the next year. The dynamics change all the time. So Bloom's taxonomy is a very good place to start. But we also have to look at Bloom's when we're looking at a blended learning approach, where we flip that around, or have a flipped classroom approach. And these are exciting methodologies that we are now beginning to drip down into infants. getting children mind mapping in the most basic way, getting them to do a flipped classroom and a blended learning approach. And we're able to do this now online. But just think of the things that we can do now that we couldn't do 24 months ago due to the pandemic. So, yeah, doing a lesson plan generically with the hope that, you may have 20,000 people using this lesson plan. The one thing you have to be secure about is that your teaching notes offer the diversity for the teacher to be able to say, I can try that, but that's not going to work. Maybe I'll do that suggested activity. I'm definitely not doing that one. And more than anything, assessment and evaluation. How are you, the teacher, evaluating the work that's going on in the classroom? Because my experience has been that you can have children who exemplify perfect workbooks, have no retention of what they have done. And then you can have children who are silent in a classroom, yet when they are playing, you are hearing the language, the connections, the interactions. So it's continuous reflective assessments.
Yeah. So, ma'am, question number 4. Like now I'm asking the questions related to the Jolly Phonics.
Okay.
Like our students are confused. Students are confused in the sound of the letters C and K. How can we tell them the difference in sounds? Because the sound of C is K and sound of K is also K. So they are just confusing in that, and many of the times they have asked me, what is the difference between C? The sound of C is also K and sound of K is also K. So which letter we have to write? So please tell us.
This is the problem with English being a language that has been built up from so many other different languages. If we think about the C sound, that came from the Romans. And if we think of the K sound, that came from the Latin and from the Greek. And the problem is that when the Romans came to England, they changed all the K, the K into C's, and it kind of like got very confusing as time went by. There are little rules that we can use for understanding, for spelling, but again with English, we have a rule, and then a little bit further along, we break that rule. But it's interesting to think that if you think of the C sound, the K as in cat, if that can change dramatically if we put it with an H, say like in church, but it's chalet in English, which can also be the French word, choir, you think of chemist, so there's all these variations. The one thing you can say is that if we have a C with an A, O and a U, they generally work together. So that's one little rule we can have for a child. And if we have a K, it can go with an E and an I. Now, if we have a CK, again, that has a certain rule. It always tends to be at the end of a word or towards the end of a word, like knuckles and things like that. Now, addressing how we teach a child, this is why, if we're using synthetic phonics, we have to have this systematic approach. Now, the C and the K are the only ones in the Jolly Phonics program that are unique in that we can have them together and we can have them apart and have the same sound. So it's very important that we have spelling clusters where children are seeing the words that have the C sound and the words that have the K sound. And they begin to see how these work. Now, the confusing thing with CK is that if I say cake, you're hearing the K sound, cake. But if I put that in the plural, cakes, you're hearing the X sound for X. So again, we have to draw attention. Now, I know that I mentioned about multisensory teaching, but it's important when we are doing this, the visualization. As I mentioned to you before about, I have a pen and I can know its name in English and Spanish. Remember that letters are images that get imprinted in our brain. We can't say you can distinguish one sound from another, but with that general rule I have given you about the short vowel sounds that go there, we can kind of guess that we have cat with a C and not cat with a K, except for Kit Kat, the sweets. But if you're teaching this, just like when you move on to diagraphs, you have to slow down. Additionally, small dictation or manipulation of plastic figures, the brain is organizing how it responds to those letter sounds. Children will make errors. And one thing I will say about using Jolly Phonics is we have to allow for errors, because when they're making errors, they are understanding, does that look right? Does that sound right? And how do I correct it? So this is a question that gets asked globally about C and K. 1, teach the sounds individually. 2, try and teach them with the short vowel sounds so that children can see that there's a type of a pattern. Then when we move on to the CK, the manipulation of how are you doing this with your robot arm? Are you blending out, put a, pack, but a, back, back. How are you doing this? How are you getting the children to use their multisensory approach? But it's a very common one, and more so when I hear teachers say, but when it goes into the plural, what am I going to do? They're putting sounds. It's true. So I hope that has answered one of the questions about the C and the K.
It's amazing, ma'am. As whoever is going to watch our show, they will understand the difference between in C and K.
Yeah, well, I would say the most important thing, and I have taught this many times, is first, although it's represented together in the big book and also in worksheets, to slow down. Using Jolly Phonics, you will know where to speed up and slow down. And as we progress with the groups, you learn that you have to slow down because there's so much revision involved. You can't revise 36 letter sounds as quickly as you did 6. But certainly when it comes to the C and K, look at spelling clusters. Get children to see you write. They need to make the visual connection. Remember, writing is the last thing a child can do, but their reading starts as soon as they've got those 6 sounds up there. They're reading, not reading like we could imagine, but they're identifying and reading.
Yeah. So your question 5th, as there are some letters like A apple, and E elephant. So both sounds are same. How do we tell them the difference? Because they usually asked which letter we have to write in words. Like as we are using 2 words, bad, B-A-D, bad. And another word is B-E-D, bad. So the different meanings are different, but the pronunciations are same because we use A, E, A. So they are totally confused in that which letter we have to write in that word.
Okay, so if we take those 2 words, we have bed and we have bad. Now, can you see that one of the ways, if you're doing a dictation, is you've got to slow down as well. Now, when I first started doing dictations, I would often use the movements as well, because again, I understand there's pronunciation and everything. So I've got the, the new kind of card here. So it's getting children to identify what they hear. If you said, okay, I want you to write the word bed, bed. I'm focusing, I want that short vowel sounds. If the child they can make their own. It doesn't have to be this one. They can have their own sound chart. First of all, what I would say is, can you identify the short vowel sounds? So if we said bed, 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 you can hear the e. Identify it. Where is it on here? Now, if they're gravitating to here, then I've got to think, why are they hearing that short vowel sound ah and not e? Ah. and not e. But if they're gravitating to here with the e sound, I know they're right. So again, it's how are we doing with pronunciation? Remember, as a teacher, how you pronounce these short vowel sounds will impact on how a child learns them. Now, when you learn another language and you're writing, you are actively translating. That means you are going from one language to another and writing down. So, for example, here in Spain, the children put an artificial e sound in front of an S. So they say Spain, estar, skill, escape, and that comes through into their writing because they hear the teacher say it. So looking at these short vowel sounds, we have to do a lot of work with either having your consonant, CVC, and sliding through. So if I have ed, I would have all the vowels, ad, ed, id, odd, bud, and get the children to manipulate all these sounds so they are hearing for discrimination. If your children are confusing the a sound with the e sound, then you need to slow down your teaching, because if we don't get this right at foundation level, when we move on to the diagraphs and the alternatives, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to have errors with the long vowel sound and the short vowel sound. So there are things we can use. You can use the vowel hand, where they have their hand and they have a, I, o, and they can be pointing to the short vowel sound. At home, they can have post-its and they can just put them on a bit of cardboard. You can say, okay, change the a for the e, now the e for the I for the o. Get them manipulating the sounds. But this is quite a common thing here, because the I and the E are confused here, not so much the A and the E. But you'll have to consider slowing down and doing lots of short vowel work with dictation, with visual blending, tactile blending, and also for your assessment online, getting the children to point to the sound that they think they are hearing. Now, if 50% of the class are getting it wrong, it means you have to roll back and look at your planning for that. Okay. It's not an easy process. Once we get the short vowels right, the long vowels follow really easily.
Okay, ma'am, question number 6. Tricky words like it, it. Why we use it as a tricky word? Because we pronounce I as E, T as T, like this. So it. So we can use this phonic word, like phonic sound. So why we are using it and as a tricky word?
Okay, the term tricky word has come from Jolly Phonics. But actually, all the words that are used in their tricky word lists are something that we used to refer to as high frequency words and also sight words. So in your tricky word list, you have a combination that was put together by Sue Lloyd and Sarah Wernham to fit in with the spellings of the program. But if we look at these words, when I first started teaching, the children had high frequency words. So you're quite right. There's some words like it and that that are decodable. You know, and then there are some words from the sight word list, like one, the, I, he, she, which are tricky because they've got long sounds. So the tricky word list has been put together from using the high frequency word list. And the high frequency word lists are words that we see with high frequency in everyday writing. So these have a logical approach to them. But then also in the tricky word, they put in the sight words. Now the sight words are words that we cannot apply the decodable blending and segmenting structure to them. We can't apply the sounds that we know. We have to learn them by sight. And it's really important that children have a lot of displays so that they can constantly be looking, even in a dictation, that they can see these words so that they understand their shape and their sequence and how they go together. So the tricky word list is a bit of a combination of these two lists. So we have a percentage of words that are easily decodable, but we have a high percentage of words that follow the sight word list, which means they have to be learned just as they are. And they need to see them in a context, they need to hear them. And a lot of these words on their own have actually no meaning, like on and it and be. They have no meaning, but in a context they do. So you're quite right for pointing out that. And I hope this explanation kind of covers that it's a mixture of the two. Words that can have the synthetic phonics approach applied to them. Words like, for example, that's a split digraph. But certainly ones like one and I and things like that are tricky ones.
Okay, so ma'am, next question. Like some words are there in the sounds of I and U. Like with the with the letter I, we speak ice cream, iron, and like with the letter U, we use uniform. But sometimes we use igloo, like igloo. It sounds like E. The sound of I is E. But sometimes we use ice cream, ice, and iron. So students are asking like, Ki, why we are using I here? If the sound is E, then why we are using I? And the second is U, uniform. So U, the sound of U is A. Then why we are using uniform U sound? Why we are using U? So just because they are part of an alternative spelling, just because of this, we are using these kinds of sounds.
Yeah, these are the long vowel, short vowel, and long vowel sounds that we hear. Now, if you think back before we did synthetic phonics, we learned alphabetically, and we had one phoneme or one grapheme representing the short vowel and the long vowel. And it's only with time that we've moved on to having a structured approach where with synthetic phonics, we've got this really, where you can see all the spelling choices. The one thing is I would advise all your teachers to look at is the simple to complex code that is available on the Jolly Learning website, which will give them all the spelling variations for a particular phoneme, a sound. Just like I mentioned with the C and the K, we have inherited a lot of these words, and therefore the spellings have not changed with the pronunciation. If you think of many of the words in English, there is no logical way for why they're being spelled. And I'll give you the word like jumped. Where is the T in jumped? It's because we used to pronounce it jumped. So you're quite right to point out that these words can have a long sound and a short sound, and we do not look at this vocabulary until children are secure with the short vowel sound before we move on to the long sound. But equally, it's like, why do we have PH for the F sound? Why do we have, let's think of another one, SSC for the, like in scent, for the K sound, like in city? So there is no rule for this. I can't say that it's because there's a consonant or a vowel. It's just things we have to learn, that there is a change in the manipulation of the sound. But the one thing is that children progressing with the program begin to recognize the variation of the sounds. So this is why getting the foundation level correct, short vowel, long vowels, and then we extend to the complex code. So we start with the simple code and then we extend to the complex code. And this is the problem with English, is that although we have the 26 shapes of letters, we have more than 44. In fact, on average, they say there's over 200 sounds in English. So, yeah, There's no easy answer to that one. That's how it is, and we can't change how.
I also thought about that, they have given only 42 letter sounds, but some sounds are also there like PH. They have not given PH, but with the PH we can use the word photo,
Yeah,
fur. With the
they are.
PH, so
Yeah. If you move on to Jolly Grammar, all these extended spellings are covered. So it's a progression that the first 3 years is getting the 42, maybe 44 sounds in. And then as you move on to Jolly Grammar, you certainly explore the variety of how these sounds that you know are even extended again. And this is with spelling choices, understanding that some of the rules we've learned are manipulated slightly. And children, as they move on, like to grammar 5 and 6, will also learn about using the not only the PH, but the PYS for psi, really unusual combinations. So this is why, if you're going to do Jolly Phonics, think about extending this to grammar, because you put all that investment in the foundation. Why are you not continuing it? And also the grammar structures that are there as well. So there are some very complicated spelling structures as we move on into grammar, but they are working on the assumption that the child has got these 42 sounds secure to begin with. So I'd advise any of your teachers or parents just to have a look at what goes on, because what happens is when we teach the PH sound, we first revise the sound. So again, it's about spelling clusters, looking at the sound and then moving to the PH sound. So it's the same with up and oo, with the words that we've learned, with the short vowel and the long vowel, and also the exceptions like uniform or ice cream.
Okay, ma'am, next question. Like after this phonics, want to ask one question on LSRW skills. In the foreign countries, all are very used to with English language. So how a kid or a new learner can learn and improve their LSRW skills? Please give us some tips.
Okay, well, that comes down to one, from the point of view of planning. If you're going to talk about, for example, long and short sounds, how are you making this into listening, speaking, reading, and also writing? How are you touching, as I mentioned before, you're going to teach one concept. How are you going to teach that in 5 different ways? How are you going to address that? It is embedded into most of the curriculums in Europe that we use this systematic approach, that it's not only what you hear, it's what you see. And writing can be a sandbox, writing can be Play-Doh, but you're manipulating that knowledge so that it is ingrained. So for students, if for example, we're going to teach that PH sound that we've just spoken about, your students would be clearly a little bit older, but what you would be doing is making comparisons so that they're listening to the f sound and the f sound. You'd be making sure that they are looking at the different grapheme manipulations for these words. Then you would encourage them to do some reading, and in that reading you'd be getting them to highlight. They could do it online with the cursor, with the tools, highlight the words that have the PH sound. And then you would encourage them to either do some short writing, using a lexicon of words that you have given them. Because remember, when we're learning in a second language, vocabulary doesn't come automatically. We have to help. But also, what methodology are you going to use? You could have paired writing, you could have shared writing. You could have each of your students just doing one line and making silly sentences. That could be a story. So looking at the approach that you're on about, this should be applied to not only English, but every subject that is being taught. And as a teacher, what we have to decide is, how much am I going to do on each aspect? Trying to do all of these things with every single lesson may be exhausting for a teacher. But what you have to think of in your overall planning and this goes back to curriculum design, in that week, how much am I going to spend on listening, speaking, writing, and reading, and put that all together, that the children are passively learning, and also when I do my unique teaching point, they're explicitly learning. So as a teacher, this is a skill that comes with having good direction, having good planning, but also working from that point of view of understanding the child in the classroom. And again, going back to that emerging learning style, it's also reflective practice, which is something that we need to have as a teacher, that when you've finished your class, and just like I said, you know, when you mentioned about the A and the E, if 50% of the class are not getting the right sound, I have to look at my planning and say, what am I getting wrong? So that's your reflective planning part. But yeah, it's a very big part of the NEP now, this approach as well that's coming through. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yes, we are explaining the sounds with the help of stories, like as we have taught our kids, like ants are crawling and egg cracking egg. So like this, they are doing actions in the online. So yes, we are very happy to see them that they are doing the actions and they are learning the sounds also.
Yeah.
So it's very useful for the kids also. But ma'am, there's one question, like one O. Yeah. There is a question.
I heard you say oh, and then it froze, so I didn't get all the question. Sorry.
No. As O anyone. O anyone. So here is this O, sound of O is O. So why we are pronouncing V, one? Is it a tricky word?
Yeah, this is, well, now you're talking about a sight word. Okay, you're talking about a sight word where if we pronounce one, W-O-N, I won that cup. Again, one, we have a manipulation. But just remember that with a word like one, it is part of the sight word list. So there is no explanation for that. We have to learn it as a shape, as a sequence of letters, and its pronunciation. There is no decodable way to pronounce that one. Now with the other one, W-O-N, we have W-O-N, but we also have schwa, which is affecting it. So it's W-O-N. We have the schwa sound. And again, this is a confusing concept for people, because if you're listening to an American person say the word teacher, you're hearing the at the end. And if you say, I'll say teacher, you're hearing the schwa at the end, where I've manipulated the long vowel sound. It's an into an a, like mirror and gonna. So that particular word that you've chosen, one, O-N-E, is a sight word, and it's in the tricky word list. We can't decode it. We can't apply the rules and the strategies that we have learned with most decodable words to the sight word words.
We can tell in the alternative spelling also, because as in the alternative spelling, they have told us about that there are two vowels in between, there is one consonant. So O is the vowel, N is the consonant, and E is also the vowel. So can we tell is that as alternative spelling too?
What, the word one?
Like O-N-E-one. Right. So in the alternative spelling, the Jolly Phonic tells that O is the vowel and E is also the vowel, and there is a dash between them. O and E.
So you're looking at this one here, this one.
Yes.
Okay, well, it's not a split digraph in that way. You're talking about split digraph where the first vowel does the talking and the second one does the walking. So if we were looking at that rule, it would be on. So you have on, un. I'll give you an example. So if you have, this is a good way to do it. So you have pine. Now, if we use what you're saying, the split digraph, we have like pin, pine. So if we apply what you're saying, which is on, it would be own.
Yes.
So we can't apply the rule of a split digraph to the word one, and that's why it's in the tricky word list. But it's a good way for children to understand, going back to a split digraph where we have the long vowel sounds and the alternative, is if you're going to use words, you know, like the easy one where we have like the magic or a split digraph is like cone, and they can hear that long sound that the E is manipulating the first vowel. We could have, let's have another one. Globe, twine, twin. Can you see how it changes? It makes it into a long vowel sound, having the E on the end. So applying this rule to the word one doesn't work, and that's why it's in that list. But it's a good point to make when teaching, because I imagine it's an error that's often applied, that one has got it's a C, it's a consonant vowel, no, it's a vowel, consonant vowel word, so why not use it like a split digraph? But we can't, not with that one.
Okay, and the last question, all kids are not same, as some are having some disabilities too. Like for an example, like having dyslexia. So how will he or she pronounce a letter or words? Is phonics beneficial here too, or there any part of LSRW skills?
Okay.
Like it is like he's facing dyslexia, so he's not able to pronounce the letter and word. So here, is it beneficial? Phonics is beneficial for that kid.
Okay. What I would say is, one, what we have to remember, going back to what I mentioned about ages and stages, that all children get to a certain point, but they take different times getting to it. So we can't make an assumption about a child having dyslexia without a proper diagnosis. Additionally, this is why we usually say that children start writing maybe at the age of 6, because then everything is cognitively ready to make that connection between what you hear and how you write it, the grapheme and the phoneme. Another thing that's important to know is that children go through stages where their brain accelerates with understanding concepts like letters and sounds and organizing them, and then they slow down, and you may have things like mirror writing or writing that goes large and small, and children forget sounds. If you're working in a second language environment, just remember how difficult it is sometimes to make that connection if you're thinking in one language and having to then flip and think in another language. That's also something we have to think about. Now, if you're going to use phonics with a child who has any disability, be it audio, visual, even to do with the spectrum of autism, you have to remember that a highly multisensory approach is needed. It's torture for a child with emerging dyslexia to see everything visually. You are providing them with something that affects their most weakest component, and that is organizing the letter shape with the letter sound visually. We really don't know why dyslexia starts, but what I can say is that we've been speaking for 100,000 years and we've only been reading for 6,000 years. So the brain is still accommodating a lot of this new information that it has to deal with. The organization of sounds and letters may not work, and I know this because my son is dyslexic, and we discovered he was dyslexic because he was using Jolly Phonics. His teacher recognized that he was not making the correlation between what he saw and what he heard. Yeah, asking him to blend on his arm, he could do that really well. Now, having this intervention meant that his whole direction of education changed to look at everything being highly audio and visual. Now, as a teacher, you do not know with very small children if they have a problem processing sound. You imagine if you're hearing a sound in a particular way and everybody else is hearing it in another way. So sometimes we don't know what a child can see and can hear because they're too small to tell us. And I remember one of my students getting a hearing aid at the age of 5 and saying, I thought that that sound was done like this. And it was because they were interpreting the sound the other way. So certainly, yes, it's a highly visible, multisensory approach where if you can't write it, you can do the actions. If you can't read it, you can say it. And also, as I mentioned about the blended learning and flipped classroom approach, also the tools that we can use, like recording a child, getting a parent to video a child, manipulating letter shapes, these all help with your evaluation for children who are finding it extremely challenging to work in a conventional way. So I hope that helps.
Awesome, ma'am. It's really wonderful. Your tips, your advices, your suggestion, everything was very wonderful. And I want all my viewers to watch this so that they can understand and they can get the solution of their queries. And at last, I can say you that a very big thank you to coming on Educreate's platform. Tell something about India, if you know about it.
What I understand about India, so you're asking me what do I understand about India? I think India is a super rich, diverse, multicultural, exciting country to be in. There's never a dull moment. There is always, and the history there is just amazing. And more so, the diversity of the language and the foods. It is a country that people don't really know until you visit. And it's a country that when you visit, you want to keep going back. You just want to keep going back. And it's like I mentioned about Spain having many things. India is rich in so many ways. And I just wish people could look at that part of it and not just think of the overall country, but break it down into what it has to offer. So, yeah, the love affair of India continues for me.
It's really nice of you, ma'am. It's really sweet of you. So as I'm going to end our session, so at last, thank you so much for giving us your valuable and precious time. And
I hope to see you all again soon.
As I'm going to plan one webinar series, as most of the parents want to join in that session, but I told them that it's just a talk show with ma'am. So I will plan a webinar series with you so that whatever the queries of parents, they can get the solution easily.
Yeah, yeah, because it's difficult to pack everything into a short period of time, but maybe some explicit kind of help in particular areas would be very beneficial for the parents. So that'd be lovely, yeah.
So thank you so much, Yvonne, to ma'am. Thank you so much, my all viewers. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, ma'am.